Here we go. Study session to discuss the affordable housing overlay zones. Staff report by Wendy Rooney.
Good evening, Mayor, Chair Jensen, council members, and planning commissioners. Staff has a short presentation, about a 10-minute presentation for you on the key components of the affordable housing overlay zone, or as it's fondly become known as the AHAZ. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers and discussion. The AHAZ is the key implementing program of the general plan housing element. It addresses the state's requirements to identify lands appropriate to meet the regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA, projections over the period of time from 2007 to 2014. The RHNA is the state's assessment of the number of residential units in 5 income categories that will be required during the 7-year period of time to meet the state housing needs. Los Gatos' remaining RHNA for the 2007-2014 period is 452 units. It's very important to note that while the state requires the town to identify land appropriate for residential development, the town is not responsible, and I stress this point, the town is not responsible for guaranteeing construction of the units. The development of the units is largely a private sector function. The town's responsibility is to ensure that there's appropriate land, that governmental regulations are minimized, and that there is sufficient density to build these developments at a density that's affordable by design, and that is 20 units per acre. Often municipalities will rezone large acres of industrial or commercial land to be able to meet its RHNA. However, an alternative to the large-scale development is what the town has done, and the many smaller communities that are potentially built out have used the same process, and that's the affordable housing overlay zone. It's applied to a much smaller number of properties. In March 2012, the Town Council adopted the 2007-2014 housing element, which included action item HOU 2.1. HOU 2.1 requires the town to amend the town code to include an affordable housing overlay zone. This proposed overlay zone fulfills this requirement. Also, based on the review of the draft affordable housing overlay zone standards and incentives, the state has certified the town's housing element last month as meeting state housing law. I'm just going to put my glasses on for a moment and walk through the sites. So we have 5 sites that are remaining, and I say remaining because we actually start with 10 sites a couple of years ago, and we're down to 5 sites in the affordable housing overlay zone. The Knowles and Capri site, the old former courthouse site, is right up here. Right near it is the South Bay site, and as you can see, although it's located near Winchester and Knowles, it's the parcel off of it. It's not the parcel, it's not directly on Winchester. And then we have 3 Oka Road sites. We have Site A, this one, and that's located just north of the JCC. We have Site B, which is right across it on the east side of Oka Road, and then we have Site C, which is a little south of Site B. The HOZ does not result in rezoning the properties. The property owners have the right to develop the property under the existing zoning and general plan designation or use the HOZ, but importantly, they cannot use a combination of both. It's one or the other. The HOZ contains development standards such as setbacks, building heights, parking ratios, etc., densities, affordability targets or ratios, incentives, and architectural and site standards. The development standards, densities, affordability ratios vary on each of the 5 AHOZ sites. The town also created the AHOZ architectural standards, which is attachment 15 to your report. One of the principal goals of the affordable housing overlay zone is to create development standards and incentives that offer advantages that are similar or slightly better than the state density bonus program, to effectively preclude the use of the state density bonus program on these properties. The General Plan Committee, who oversaw the development of the AHOZ, carefully considered the maximum density that each of these sites could accommodate while still ensuring neighborhood compatibility, maintaining consistency with the town's high standards, and minimizing impacts such as traffic and schools. The addition of up to a 35% density bonus that would be granted under the state density bonus program could be inconsistent with these goals that were just stated. If a developer were to choose to use a state density bonus, then the densities upon which that bonus would be established would be the existing zoning and not the AHOZ. That's a really important distinction. Everything defaults back to the existing zoning on the property. However, to ensure that the carefully crafted AHOZ would be used rather than the existing zoning and potentially state density bonus program, the development standards, densities, and incentives were created on a site-by-site basis in response to the characteristics of the individual properties and their settings. Using the town's multifamily or RM development standards as a starting point, each site was carefully reviewed along with any constraints and locational factors. The GPC elected to use the town's existing standards for lot coverage, for property setbacks, unless there was something unique about the property, such as on the South Bay side, it's adjacent to the creek, so we went with a larger setback. Excuse me, I lost my place. And to further encourage the To further encourage the use of the HOZ, the committee also recommended using the state density bonus parking ratios, and that's 1 space for 0 to 1 unit, 2 spaces for 2 to 3 bedrooms, and 2.5 spaces for 4 bedrooms. The densities were set at the state density bonus for suburban communities, which is 20 units per acre, and that's also consistent with the town's high-density residential designation. 20 units per acre is considered affordable by design. Building heights are similar to the RM standard, but vary slightly by allowing an additional 5 feet for structures that incorporate the parking on the first floor, such as a 3-story townhouse. Consistent with the town code, a 5 feet height increase is allowed for podium and underground or cellar parking. The Planning Commission or Town Council can approve a higher height limit through the architectural and site review process if specific findings are made. And finally, the existing allowance for architectural projections was also built into it. Each site has an assigned affordability ratio to meet the 4 income levels of very low and below. It's actually 5, but we decided to combine very low and below. So it's very low and below, low, moderate, and above moderate. The GPC recommended, and this is a really important distinction, the GPC recommended allowing adjustments to those affordability ratios on each site individually as they're reviewed, as long as the overall units within each income category are achieved. In order to make the AHOZ more attractive than using the state density bonus law provisions, a developer is automatically granted 4 incentives, which is 1 more than the state density bonus grants. The GPC is recommending automatically granting 4 incentives for development that meets all the AHOZ intent. The incentives would be selected from development standards, from processing procedures, and financial contributions. And I'll quickly go through those. For development standards, it's a reduction in parking. It allows a 1 space per unit for seniors, for persons with disabilities, and also for development which is within 1/4 of the Fosona Light Rail Station. And it allows a reduction to 1.3 spaces per unit for the South Bay development property because of its location right next to the planned Fosona Light Rail Station. A density bonus is recommended on only 2 of the 5 sites, and that's the South Bay site and the courthouse site. Because of the fact that Oka Road really functions as a large cul-de-sac, the committee wisely felt that it wasn't appropriate to have a density bonus there because traffic's pretty much funneled into the one street, and we really don't want to add any more traffic into that. Setback reductions are allowed on up to 2 property setbacks. And finally, an increase in lot coverage from the RM standard of 40% to 50% maximum. In regards to processing procedures, an incentive could be priority processing for planning and engineering divisions review the architectural and site application, and priority processing for building plan check and inspections. And on the financial incentives, if this is not, the applicants can either ask for a waiver of planning fees and planning and engineering fees, as well as building and inspection fees. And if that isn't chosen as an incentive, then we would recommend a deferral of those fees until occupancy of the unit. The GPC is also recommending that there be pre-application conferences, and that there be no limit on time for pre-application conferences like are in our current standards. The Affordable Housing Overlay Design Guidelines were originally created to demonstrate that a variety of quality residential products of varying densities could be accommodated on each of the 5 AHOC sites. The GPC felt that the guidelines provide a good example of the town's expectations for the Affordable Housing Overlay Zone. However, the committee wanted to allow flexibility and did not want to constrain any potential developer to having to do just one of those types of products. So the guidelines are used to provide general sound planning and architectural direction, as well as site-specific guidelines for each of the properties, physical settings, surroundings, nearby uses, and environmental constraints. The guidelines will provide direction for staff, the applicant, and for the reviewing bodies. The GPC, as you can see from your staff report and your, I think it's 11-minute attachments, the GPC spent considerable time analyzing and discussing the AHOZ concept. In all, we had 11 meetings, advertised meetings that were held. The committee heard presentations from affordable housing developers and potential affordable housing overlay zone developer. The minutes from each of these are contained in attachments 4 through 14 of your report. While not every detail was unanimously agreed upon, it was discussed, and the committee found that the AHOZ development standards, incentives, and architectural and site guidelines meet the town's goals for the program, the housing element, HOU 2.1, and could result in providing needed quality affordable housing for the town residents. The GPC, although again they did not agree on every detail, they did unanimously recommend approval of the Affordable Housing Overlay Zone implementing actions and the draft Affordable Housing Overlay Zone design guidelines. Any additional information that's received tonight or input tonight will be incorporated into the program, to the Affordable Housing Overlay Zone program. And in December, we will be holding a public hearing with the Planning Commission to consider the General Plan Amendment to incorporate the AHOZ into the housing element, General Plan Amendment to amend the designation for the courthouse site so that it can be developed with housing or office as it's intended to do, a zoning code text amendment to incorporate the overlay standards into the zoning code, and a map amendment to incorporate the overlay into the map. We also have processed an addendum to the general plan EIR that analyzed the impacts of the changes of eliminating 5 properties from the affordable housing overlay zone and increasing the density on 2 of the sites. And the council public hearing will occur in January 2013, and that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Bourgeois. Commissioner Bourgeois' hand went up quickly, so I'll go to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we get into the meat of the discussion, as the chair of the General Plan Committee, I just wanted to acknowledge staff's hard work on this and the long, hard work that the committee put in. As hopefully you saw from the minutes, this was really a collaborative effort, and there was rigorous discussion on all of the points that Ms. Rooney just discussed, and I think we've ended up in a good place. But I'm looking forward to hearing further input from council and the other planning commission members. And there are 4 committee members up here tonight. Hopefully we can help answer some of those questions that you have. So thank you to staff, and thank you to all the committee members, both those present and not present.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Councilmember Leonardis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just looking at the sites that we are choosing here, I realize that the courthouse is excess property, surplus property. Looking at the 3 Oka Road sites, are those currently vacant land?
I believe Oka Road Site A is vacant. Oka Road Site B, I believe, does I'm trying to remember if it has a home on it. There's the sites on the east side of Oka Road have a variety of single-family structures, and I'm trying to remember the lines between the properties are not overly clear. Let me see if I can tell from our. I don't. Yes, I believe on. I don't believe there's anything on B, but I believe that there is a structure that's probably a house on C.
And then with the property on Knowles, currently there's 2 office buildings. This is the South Bay site, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Currently, there's 2 office buildings in the front, and this is the rear part of the parcel?
Correct. It's the 7 acres to the rear, so it's the office building to the rear.
So that could conceivably be removed someday?
When the general plan was underway and the analysis was done on where appropriate sites would be for housing, this was looked at because at that time, South Bay had a pretty high vacancy rate. Now Netflix actually occupies a good portion of the most easterly portion of the buildings. But at that time, I think they had about a 30 to 40% vacancy rate. In addition to that, the general plan designation for the South Bay site is high-density residential. So it was intended at one time that would be an appropriate location for residential. And then lastly, there were at least 2 CDAC applications for residential for that site. So it seemed like an ideal site at the time, and I think it's still a viable site, depending upon how their existing use continues. If they continue at a higher occupancy, I don't see that converting for a long time. However, it is probably a Class B, maybe even Class C industrial site, and I could see a conversion in the future.
Thank you.
Other questions of staff? Commissioner Telesfor.
Thank you. Thank you for the report, including all the minutes, which I read, and Commissioner Bourgeois, you're right. The GPC put in a tremendous amount of work, and all of you should be congratulated for it. I can imagine the discussions. But my question, I have lots of questions, but let me just start with 2. And one is, there was a comment in here about figuring out which school districts would be, well, I'm interested in knowing which school districts would be affected by these developments and at what level, and have the school districts been brought in on this process?
I'll answer your last question first, and yes, we did outreach to all the school districts. I can tell you that the Campbell school districts did not contact staff with any additional, we sent to them what was being proposed, and they did not contact staff. I think that could be because this was proposed in the general plan, and we met with them on the general plan 2.5 years ago and talked to them about it at that time, so they were well aware of it. We did meet. We did notify the 2 Los Gatos school districts, and we met and discussed this with both superintendents.
Okay, so you have not talked to the superintendent of Campbell?
We sent them a letter asking if they'd like to meet with us, and they did not respond to us. Okay. But again, we did meet with them 2.5 years ago when the housing element was going through its drafting.
Okay, so which developments affect which school district?
South Bay and the courthouse property are in the northern area, and they would be within the Campbell school districts, and then the 3 Oka Road sites would be within the Los Gatos school districts.
And do we have any projections for numbers of students?
We do. They're in the general plan EIR, and I don't have those handy, but I can provide those at Planning Commission when we come for the public hearing.
Okay. And then also one other question, this is about process, but there was a presentation by Jan Lindenthal from Mid-Penn, right? And she, in one of the paragraphs, it states that she provided solutions, including educating the community on the issues surrounding affordable housing and pre-zoning of affordable housing sites. So have we done that? I'm not aware of it. Are we planning on doing that?
I'm sorry, public education on this? Yes. I actually think this whole process of developing the affordable housing overlay zones and developing the housing element is some of that public education. The community's been invited to participate throughout the entire process over the last almost 3 years of developing the housing element. In addition, we do have action items in the housing element that will direct the staff to do outreach in terms of informing the community of what our affordable housing activities are and working with affordable builders who also do that as part of their mission.
Okay, you invited, excuse me, just,
Go ahead.
I'm just curious because I'd like to know the process we use. But is it an invitation in the newspaper or on the web?
In regards to
website, or
which,
how does
in regards to which
any of
meeting?
this- How do you communicate to the public? How do you invite them in? You said you,
Well, with the housing element, we did that through a variety of means. There were definitely articles in the paper. There were large quarter-page ads in the paper. It was posted on What's New. In the general plan housing element, the action item is a new action item for the town, and we haven't really thought through how we would do that. But usually we would work with the affordable housing developers to do some public outreach. And I can also say that the town regularly works with the Housing Trust and the Santa Clara County Housing Authority to do outreach. And I think we'll be doing a lot more work on our website with outreach too.
okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions of staff? Commissioner Erickson?
On page 6 of the staff report, under number 4, incentives and process for securing incentives, the second sentence says in the second part, to preclude the developer from using the state density bonus program in conjunction with the affordable housing overlay zone. So one could interpret that language in 2 different ways, that it's possible for them to do it, and so we're trying to write, it's possible for them to do that, and we're trying to write something at the town level that would preclude them from doing it. And I guess, or is there case law, statutory law? What's the relationship between, does creating an affordable housing overlay zone preclude them from using the state bonus density program?
No, it does not. So you have to actually build that language into the ordinance, which is what we will do. And we'll build into the ordinance, we'll be adopting 5 different ordinances, one for each site. And each of those ordinances will indicate, just like if you remember back on the state density bonus law, when we adopted that, we had specifically in the ordinance saying that if you choose or elect to use the state density bonus law, you're precluded from using the town's density bonus program. We will do the same thing in the AHOZ ordinances that says if you elect to develop under the AHOZ, you will not be able to also use the state density bonus law. And we reviewed that with HCD, and we crossed our fingers, and they agreed with it. So we were that was the intent of making the AHOZ equal to or slightly better than the state density bonus law is the only way we're able to do that, because if we did not make this as attractive as the state density bonus law, then I think the state could reasonably say that you are not allowing a program that's already in place to provide certain advantages to build affordable housing. But by developing a program that actually exceeds, allows us to preclude that. Cities of Tiburon and Corte Madera did the exact same thing.
So, follow-up
ahead,
question.
please.
So, have there been cases in the state where there are actually municipalities who adopted this, where someone has contested it, and those municipalities have?
Not that I know of.
So we're hoping that it would be sufficient.
Well, we have checked with legal counsel on those 2 jurisdictions that have already implemented that, and we checked with state housing and community development. And the affordable housing overlay zones are relatively new. I would say this is the first housing element cycle, the 2007-14, where this has ever been attempted. I think that we are one of the first of maybe less than a dozen cities in California that are using it, so there's probably not case law on that. However, I think we're at an equal risk as we are to our state density bonus program that we adopted and precluded the use of our existing density bonus program. So I think it's an equal risk.
Did you have
Do
another
I get a
one?
second question, or do you want me to wait?
Go ahead.
So without the 20% density bonus in the 3 Oak Road properties, is there enough incentive for them to use how important is that of the incentives and precluding that on those 3? Will they choose not to use the affordable house, how important is that extra 20% bonus?
Well, I would say from a developer's perspective, a density bonus is always an advantage. I think it really depends on the type of housing you're trying to create. If they're looking for a product that might be a little bit more, for instance, if they want to, they're going to have to do their affordable component, but if their market component is a little bit more of a higher end product, then they may not feel they need a density bonus. I don't think it would be a disincentive. The Oka Road properties are zoned medium density residential, and so with the 35% that they could achieve on the state density bonus, you're at about the same density as we're recommending at the 20 units per acre. We use that as somewhat of a yardstick. So I think that the advantages that we're offering with processing, I think the advantages that we're offering with financial incentives may exceed, and I think that a developer would also, I would assume a developer would also want to work with the town on the affordable housing overlay zone because it does offer quite a few advantages. If I could just add to that, we did do lengthy discussion on whether there should be a density bonus there, and we just really felt that given the traffic, given the lot development that's occurring in that area, it really makes sense to not have that density bonus.
Other questions of staff? Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. Are you just looking for questions right now or questions and comments?
We
I
can do
wasn't
both.
sure what your process is or.
No, we can do both now. That's fine.
Okay, well, I have a simple question, possibly a simple question, and then a more difficult statement. So I can do all 3. Okay.
Please.
So the first simple question is, do these automatically, any project that comes through under this zoning come to council, or because it's just ANS, does it stop at Planning Commission unless it's appealed?
So that is one item that we did not discuss with the GPC. Normally, ANS would just go to the Planning Commission, so we would assume that that would be how we would typically handle these applications. However, if the council believes that it really warrants the council's consideration also, then we can put that into the ordinance. So I think it's really at the council's discretion.
And I'm sure council will have an opinion on that when it comes before us. There was a comment on page 7 at the bottom paragraph talking about the waiver of permit fees and how that would get compensated, and it mentions possibly using general fund. And I just wanted to go on record now, I think that's really a bad idea to be using general fund money for this. So hopefully that won't continue as an option.
We're not required by law to reimburse the town for the cost of, for waiving fees. It's just if the town council thought that that would be inappropriate. Some communities, in the past, most communities, including Los Gatos, probably would have used redevelopment funds to reimburse. Now that those funds are no longer available, we do have the option of using the BMP funds, or it could just be an in-kind contribution of staff time. And that's typically, I think, how most jurisdictions will be doing it from here on out, given the fact that the redevelopment funds are gone.
Well, I mean, we do have BMP funds, and so I do think that's an obvious matchup there, but not the general fund. So the more difficult thing, here's the problem that I'm having, and I understand that we are backed into a corner on this. And as we went through the general plan update a couple years ago, everyone had problems with this concept and with the lack of control and with the by right portion of it. General Plan Committee Thank God I wasn't on it. I mean, just from reading the minutes, it was a very strenuous exercise that they've been through this year, and we have to approve some version of this. But the reality is going to hit the first time a project comes along and they take advantage of these by right incentives, and they build, maximum density with minimum setbacks, maximum lot coverage, the parking that's justified because it's close to the Phantom Visona light rail that may never actually be built. And whoever's on the deciding bodies at that point and the community are going to be unhinged. So how do we prepare everyone through the entire process of what this actually means, and just so that the number of heart attacks that's going to happen will be minimized? Because I can hear it now. It's not going to be a pretty thing.
I'm not sure if you're searching for a
So
comment
it's
back. I think
kind of a statement, because we are in an interesting position here. I know we have to do this, but I also know the reality the first time that it's applied, and especially that the first time it's applied, it's at the maximum level. No one's going to be happy.
I think some of the work or some of the analysis that helped the General Plan Committee with their analysis and their recommendation was the work that was done with the Affordable Housing Overlay Zone guidelines. We were able to look at each site and look at the type of housing that could be developed there. And again, for the most part, we've used our existing development standards. Granted, you can ask for a reduction in 2 of the property setbacks, or you can ask for a height increase on one product type. It's really only one product type. However, we used, for the most part, our RM standards. But I think the guidelines showed the General Plan Committee that you can build quality products within the development standards that are being proposed here without having to go through a planned development process, which is typically the process you would use to reduce setbacks, increase height, increase density. I think it showed that you can do a quality product that meets the town's goals and town's intent without having it look like an affordable housing development. I think one thing that really helps is the fact that these are going to be market rate and affordable products. They're not all just affordable products. And so when you're building a mixed income development like that, you're going to want to have the quality from both your market rate side as well as your affordable side. So I think the General Plan Committee, and they can, of course, speak for themselves, but felt that we would see products that are very similar to what we currently see in town. If you go back through the planned developments that have been approved over the last few years, you're probably going to see some height increases in some and some setback decreases in others, or in the same. I think you'll see a lot of the same elements. I don't think it's going to be anything that unusual. Lastly, the incentives are important. I think the incentives are really what convinced the state that we were serious, and we were seriously trying to incentivize these 5 properties, only these 5 properties.
Okay. Other questions or feedback for staff? I see none. Oh, Commissioner Talasfor.
There is so much here. I hope you'll excuse me, but I've not really had I'm just a little overwhelmed with all of the areas to consider in an hour and a half. So bear with me for a minute. Going back to those development standards, because those are the things that we have to be very careful about there. What Councilwoman McNutt was talking about. And how we do that, how we carefully review that. I don't think we can let go of our standards at all, and I don't think we need to. And it seems like we have a start here with the design guidelines that were put together. But here's one case in point, and stood out to me just because it did, is parking reduction. Allow 1 space per unit for seniors. And so I was thinking to myself, well, most seniors I know have 2. So is this going to be a restriction on the development? So that if you're at a senior age, you can only move in if you have one car, you have to, what if you've had a car, you've had 2 cars for 10 years, and then you can move in here, you have to sell a car? I mean, I'm confused as to where we got the number. Or I didn't know if it was realistic. It doesn't sound realistic to me.
So the standard we used was the standard that's in the state density bonus law. That was the same standard that was in our density bonus program that we adopted. However, I could say that we did further research because the GPC felt that given the location of the South Bay site, it really warranted looking at what a transit-oriented development should be parked at. And so we actually did quite a bit of research on transit-oriented development, not necessarily senior. Senior, 1 space per unit is pretty common for a senior facility. We have senior facilities in town that are 1 space per unit. But we ended up seeing standards that were at obviously all ends of the spectrum. On the transit-oriented development, the most common and the one we ended up with was 1.3 spaces per unit. So there is a lot of research behind these recommendations on parking. On the senior, we didn't do quite that level of research because that is a pretty standard. The only thing a little bit different that the committee recommended was adding physically handicapped to that also, which makes some sense. But in the end, it's really up to the developer to decide if that's going to be adequate or not. And I think a lot of it depends upon the type of housing that they're developing.
Okay, last call. Seeing none. We don't normally, we're going to have the public hearings on these at Planning and Council, correct?
Correct. We'll be at the Planning Commission most likely in December. It could be November if not all items that are planned for November end up getting calendared. At the latest, it will be December for Planning Commission, and there's only 1 meeting in December. And then for Council, it'll be in January. We did have a bit of a time clock ticking over our heads, and that was a certification. We had to have a housing element certified by the end of January 2013 to be eligible for transportation funds. The housing, or the state went ahead and proved our housing element, certified our housing element based upon a draft ordinance that I provided to them, as well as the final housing element. So we don't have that clock ticking anymore, but yes, we'd like to get this completed because, believe it or not, in 2013 we're going to start drafting the 2014 to 2022 housing element. Sorry, General Plan Committee.
The only thing I'll add is I share Councilmember McNutt's concerns about what the public's going to see and their reaction. And I think that one of the things that would, it won't take the heat off the Planning Commission, but I think that having these HOZs come to council probably makes sense. We can flesh that out in the public hearing, but I would probably put that in the draft if I were writing it. Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chair Bourgeois commended the rest of the General Plan Committee for their participation, and I think we all on the committee share sense that his leadership was extraordinary throughout this particular event. I came to this meeting so aware of what was contained here that I really didn't want to look at it any longer. Okay, but given the comments made tonight, I do want to make a couple of my own. When Commissioner Telesfor indicated that we need to take a look at that issue of outreach to our community, I think that's very significant. And I don't think that at this point in time it's sufficient for us to notice the meetings that are coming up in the standard formats and to expect that we're going to get a great deal of community response to the commission meeting or the council meeting. It probably will only occur when that, the actual project starts to come forward. So as much work as we can do as staff and as the commission and council to prepare our public for an actual project, the better off we'll be. There will be some degree of angst, guaranteed, but I do believe that, as Councilwoman McNutt indicated, we're between a rock and a hard place. And we want some things that are necessary for our community to be a fully functioning community, including affordable housing. And that is one of our missions, to allow affordable housing. So what the state is asking of us is really in support of basically part of our mission. I think the question is, how do we accomplish that within the boundaries or the parameters that the state is expecting us to fulfill? The AHOZ concept is a new concept, as Ms. Rooney pointed out, and we're kind of at the front end of this that will probably be used at a future date in many other communities throughout the state as we try to accomplish our housing element goals. I would not be afraid of our moving forward with this in any way, shape, or form. I think it's a valuable lesson for us to use with our community to help us develop a concept of more inclusive affordability within our housing mix. I think that the restraints that the GPC put on the development standards, which are based on our normal standards, they were well thought and very cleverly implemented in the document. What you don't know is that we had many a discussion that was rather, I'm not going to say heated, probably very intense in attempting to achieve what we are really trying to do, which is convince the state that we believe that this is the best thing for us and for the state's interests and desires. And with that in mind, I think what you see in front of you today is a well vetted document that allows us to do that. When we heard this last week or so that the state approved our housing element, that was a really good thing. And it's predicated on the fact that what we've done here in draft form with the state is something that we can move to approval on eventually with whatever alterations we need to make. So I think that this is a good thing. I think also it's really important when we educate the community about this, that we let them know that by this approval, we are not actually developing. We are setting a groundwork or a framework within which something could be developed. But you know how it is. Sometimes people hear the language and jump to the conclusion. And that's why we have to go with this education process. And I think the sooner we start the process, the better we'll be. Even prior to any particular development coming before us, I think this is an opportunity for us to educate our community in a really appropriate and significant part of the continuing evolution of our community. But it's going to take some effort on our parts. And I think that we need to start outlining right now how we can actually do that in a very effective way.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As one of the people up here who has been on the General Plan Committee and working on this undertaking, Mr. Przinski just presented what I would characterize as a noble reason for this product that we have a mission in our town, and this housing element and overlay zone help achieve that mission. For me, there was also a pragmatic reason, and that pragmatic reason occurred over the course of the time that we were coming up with the AHOZ. At first, when we were working on the housing element, we would hear, you have to comply with the state numbers. You have to comply with your RENA numbers. You have to provide, if not build, hundreds and hundreds of homes in Los Gatos. And then somebody like Mr. Przinski would ask, well, what if we don't? And then somebody like Ms. Rooney would say, well, then your element won't be approved. And then we would say, yeah, and then what would happen? So what? And actually, there wasn't a lot of strong reasons, if you're approaching it from a pragmatic reason, to respond to those questions until within the past year for me. And that was with Riviera Terrace. Yes, I'd heard about the state density bonus in the past, but with Riviera Terrace, it became a reality. And it became a reality that the state density bonus pretty much allows the developer, the applicant, to do what he or she wants. And so therefore, I then began approaching, and I think the committee as a whole did, this overlay zone as a practical way to deal and offset, counteract the state density program, which is a mandatory program for us. So that was my pragmatic approach to the vote I ultimately gave to this this project.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Does staff have what it needs from this process?
I think we do. I just want to let the Planning Commission and Council know that I recognize that policy items doesn't tend to bring a lot of community members out, but we did place a quarter-page ad in the newspaper for this study session. I realize that when a development application comes through, that is a different story, but we are trying to encourage the public as much as possible, and we will be doing the same with the public hearing. Rather than our standard public hearing notice, we will do the same quarter-page ad for the public hearings for the Planning Commission and for the Council.
Okay. Go ahead, Commissioner Talsfor.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. I'm wondering if that might be too little too late. I was thinking more along the lines, I'm not sure what Councilman Krasinski was thinking, of actually inviting people in to have this presented to them so that they have a chance to comment. And maybe we have to take it out to them in some way. And I'd certainly be happy to help you design that, and I don't want to put more work on anyone, but I just think it's truly important that we not leave the public out, but bring them along, because we want them to feel like that this is part of who they were as well as us, and that this is a welcoming thing. And maybe that's an idealistic attitude, I'm not sure, but I think it's one we could achieve, and I'd rather bring the community along with us than just do it to them. So it's my comment.
Okay, thank you. We do have members of the public in the audience, and although it's not required, I figure as long as we have time, we'll open it up. If somebody has something that they'd like to say regarding the AHOZs, we'll open up the public hearing, and you can have 3 minutes. Does anybody wish to? We'll have you fill out a card afterwards. And please, come forward. And you'll have 3 minutes.
Mr. Mayor, members of the Commission, my name is Mark Chersini. I'm the Senior Vice President of KT Properties. And for those of you that have not met me through the General Plan process committee, I did have an opportunity to attend a number of those hearings and hopefully provided some input that helped establish the guidelines that you're looking at today. KT Properties is under contract to purchase the remaining 3.34-acre courthouse property. We've had the pleasure of going non-refundable, so I believe we are going to close on the site, unlike prior when we had the property just under contract. I took the property through the CDAC early on to explore the setback requirements and the height requirements that have been established or being established through the overlay zone, and received some very good feedback in that process. To address the Commissioner's comment with respect to the outreach, I think it's highly important that the neighborhoods understand what an affordable housing overlay zone is all about. And in anticipation of coming in with our project, which we can have the project into the town here in very short order. I'm within 6 to 8 weeks from where we are today. But prior to submitting that project, the very first thing that we have on the agenda is a meeting on October 29th with our neighborhood group without any plans to talk about, but talk about the vision that we have for the site and what the housing overlay zone entails. I would imagine we'll have a second meeting with that same neighborhood group to then lay out the vision that we have for the site and to take their input before we formally submit to the town of Los Gatos. So I think it's very, very important for them to understand it, because I think there's a sort of misconception of what this overlay zone means. It doesn't just mean affordable housing and low-income housing. It's a mix of product types, and the project that we intend to move forward for the town is a product type that includes small lot detached townhomes and seniors all within the same community. So 3 product types on one site. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tersini. Anybody else from the public wish to speak?
Good evening. Beverly Bryant. I am working with Mark Tersini on KT Properties site that he's talked about just now. And again, I want to compliment Mr. Bourgeois and his members of the committee. We've attended just about every general plan committee for the past half year and appreciate all the work that you did. I think there are a couple things I'd just like to address rather than getting into the specifics of Mr. Tersini's site. But one thing that is true on the courthouse site, the property, which is 2 different properties. The question of moderate income housing has come in, and one of the things that KT Properties hopes to do, frankly, is to build units of senior housing, which will be low income and very low income, which is, I think, an incredible addition to the town and something that's definitely necessary. For that reason, we're looking at the question, we're questioning the ability of the developer to go ahead with moderate housing on that site, because the very low and the very, and the low income already takes up almost 60% of the requirements. So I think it's more than the town certainly would be mandated, we would be mandated to have. And the second thing is that if you look at that proportion of 50 units over the 452 very low and low income that are required by the state, it's almost 11%, a little over 11% of the number required. So right at one project, one fell swoop, that number is taken care of. So I hope that the committee would consider removing that moderate requirement, because it's really not possible to do the low and the very low income at the way it's proposed with the moderate requirement in place. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? All right, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Look to the commission or the council for any last comments. I see none. Staff complete?
Thank you. Yes, we have our information.
All right, then the study session's adjourned. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the October 15th meeting of the Town of Los Gatos Joint Town Council, Parking Authority, and Successor Agency. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Stephen Leonardis.
Here.
Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here?
Councilmember Joe Przinsky.
Here.
Vice Mayor Barbara Spector.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Steve Rice.
Here. At each of our council meetings, we have a future leader to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And tonight I'm going to tell you about Ava Curry. Ava is a 6th grader at Fisher Middle School. She loves science and history and is a straight A student. She helped organize a garage sale fundraiser for the Hibbets family, raising $4,300. That's phenomenal. She participated in the Alzheimer's Walkathon and Colorectal Awareness Run in honor of her grandmother. She ran a lemonade stand fundraiser and donated the proceeds to Alzheimer's research and colon rectal research. She plays softball for the Los Gatos Saratoga Recreation Team and travel ball team, the Travel Magic, that went to Washington for a national tournament. D.C. or state? Washington State, okay. She's been a member of that for 3 years, plays third base and sometimes outfield, and is trying out for the Fisher basketball team. She plays guitar and likes to skateboard. She's lived in Los Gatos for 4 years, moved here from Southern California, a very wise choice. Loves to travel, and a favorite place to travel is Michigan, where your mom's family lives. Please welcome Ava Curry. Come on up, Ava. Left hand. There you go.
Please stand. Place your right hand over your heart. Ready, salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's give Ava a big hand. Welcome. One more time. Next, we have a couple of presentations that go along with a little event that's happening on Sunday. So I'd like to ask Jade Bradbury and Ann Lamborn to come up to the front and join me. Good to see you. Good to see you. Thank you. So on Sunday at 1 o'clock on the second floor of the library, the photographer would like you to move in closer. Thank you. The thorn between the roses. On the second floor of the library, we're going to dedicate the art exhibit that these two ladies so ably helped us put together, and for which we have commendations for them. So I'm going to read one of them right now. The commendations are for both of you. Whereas the town of Los Gatos is celebrating its 125th anniversary jubilee year in 2012, and whereas local artists Ann Lamborn and Jade Bradbury conceived of the creation of a community art experience to engage community members in a creative endeavor celebrating the Jubilee year, whereas art creation sessions were held at the 4th of July event, the new library, and the Meadows and Terraces Senior Living Centers in Los Gatos, at which more than 400 community members of all ages contributed to the artwork, which is a collage of personalized vinyl hands, stars, hearts, and leaves. Whereas artists Ann Lamborn and Jade Bradbury devoted many hours, energy, and passion towards designing and assembling the community art experience, work of art, to be a lasting commemoration of the town's Jubilee year. Now, therefore, the town of Los Gatos does hereby render with special appreciation and commendation to Anne Lamborn for making the 125th anniversary of the town of Los Gatos that residents will remember and cherish for years to come. Congratulations to you both. I'll give you yours, Anne. And Jade. And we thank you very, very much. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. And you have a few words you'd like to say?
I certainly do. The idea for the community art experience was not mine and Jade's, but Diane McNutt's and Jade's, and not me. But I got to live with the art experience in my studio for 5 months, and we installed it today, and I'm a little sad that it's not there because I really loved having it with me all the time, and I loved seeing it, and I hope you'll all just enjoy it so much in the library. And then I'd like to say, we did something really special here. 450 people working on this mural. 450 people, and we're just a little town. And so I figured that was like 1 in every 60 people participated. That's pretty good participation. And so I'm just excited about creativity, community, art, and ecology, and leaves, and hands, and all the hands working together in the House of Books. And I'm so glad that Jade and I got to work together and to do this. And it was just, this was a spectacular experience. I don't know anybody who's ever gotten to work with 450 people to do artwork. Thank you. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you, Anne. Did you want to?
Don't forget to come join us on Sunday. The dedication will be just as much fun as putting this together was. See you then. Thank you.
Thank you, Jade. Thank you, Anne. And now the closed session report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members, members of the public. Typically, this would be the time that we would report out if the council had held a closed session before tonight's meeting, but there was none scheduled, none was held, and there's nothing to report out.
You gave me just enough time to get back up here. Thank you. Okay, reminder, if you are here to speak on any item on tonight's agenda or to speak under verbal communications, in the back of the row of pews in front of you are little buff-colored cards. You can fill those out and submit them to the clerk on my left, your right, and we will get to you at the event or the agenda item or during verbal communications. Let's go to council matters. Do any members of council have items to bring up? Seeing none, manager matters.
Yes. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, only a couple items from staff. Last Friday, the Los Gatos Redevelopment Successor Agency Oversight Board approved the reallocation of $6.4 million, most of our affordable housing funds, as required by state law. These funds will be given or taken by the state, county, and other taxing entities, likely by the end of the year. Of positive note is that the Los Gatos Union Elementary School District will receive $1.5 million of town funds. The Los Gatos Saratoga High School District will receive over $1.1 million. The fire department will receive over $850,000, and our West Valley Mission Community Colleges will receive nearly $500,000. An unfortunate outcome of the state's taking of most redevelopment funds, however, is increasing scrutiny by Moody's and other rating agencies on redevelopment and other lease-backed debt. Fortunately, Los Gatos has the highest debt rating, a so-called credit score, for any city of our size in the state, and will likely retain that ranking given our conservative financial practices, including two-tier pension reform, pay reductions, capping and pre-funding all vacation leaves, and adding to our reserves every year during the Great Recession, all as directed by the Town Council. Also, I want to announce that tomorrow evening in the Los Gatos Library, Los Gatos Poet Laureate Parthenia Hicks will sponsor an evening of poetry called Poets Canyon from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And last, tonight's Did You Know will be presented by Parks and Public Works Coordinator and doer of all things, Monica Wren. Monica?
Good evening. Let the games begin. The Creekside Sports Park opening ceremonies will be held on Saturday, October 27th from 10 a.m. to noon. The ceremonies will include participation by town council, adult and youth members of our sports and recreation community, and a very special Jubilee celebration with the assistance of the Los Gatos High School cheerleaders. Following the ceremony, we'll have a mini sports camp on the field hosted by Los Gatos Saratoga Recreation through their Kids Love Soccer and their Little Sluggers programs. There will also be a section of the field that's roped off or sectioned off for kids to just have free play and enjoy the new facility. There will be plenty of snacks and drinks available for everyone there as well. Following the ceremony afternoon, we will begin our first official games. The Los Gatos United Soccer will have 2 games that afternoon, and the following day we'll host a soccer game, a cricket game, and a lacrosse game. Thank you. For more information, beginning tomorrow morning on our homepage, you can visit losgatosca.gov, or you can give me a call with specific questions, and there's my contact information. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Wright? No, you're fine. Thank you. All right, next is the consent agenda. Do we have any council members that wish to pull an item from consent? Seeing none, do any members of the public wish to pull an item from consent? Seeing none, I'll look to council. Councilmember Brzezinski.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next is verbal communications. This is a time for anybody who wishes to speak on any item not on tonight's agenda can come forward and do so. And I believe we have some cards headed my way right now. You'll have up to 3 minutes to speak, and again, the council cannot take action on any of these items as they are not agendized. So the first card I have under verbal communications is Jack Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Jack Lucas. I'm a trustee for the West Valley Mission Community College District. And on my right is the president of our board of trustees, Ms. Adrienne Gray. Adrienne and I are on a special mission this semester. We have 2 new key administrators for the West Valley Mission Community College District. We have a new chancellor, and we have a new interim president, at West Valley College. Our mission is to introduce them to you, to say hello. We're the district, the college in your backyard. So at this point, I would like to introduce our new chancellor, which came in 3 months ago by unanimous vote from the Board of Trustees. Dr. Patrick Schmidt came down from Washington, from Wallop College, out of state, and has launched his chancellor career with the district. The second administrator I'd like to introduce is the interim president of West Valley College. That's Mr. Brad Davis. Brad's with the district for 3 years in the chancellor's office at Human Resources. Suddenly, abruptly, we lost the president of West Valley College. Brad stepped up to the plate. Pretty good metaphor for this time of the year. Stepped up to the plate and took over West Valley College. The board is very pleased with his performance also. So they would like to say hello to you. Thank you very much for letting us appear before you. You're right up there with Saratoga. Saratoga passed us. Adrienne, you got minute 12.
Well, I'm just glad to be here talking with you again, and thank you very much for your indulgence in allowing us to introduce these 2 members of the district, and I will pass the microphone, I think, on to our next speaker.
Dr. Schmidt, Chancellor of West Valley Mission Community College District.
Thank you, Jack and Adrian, and thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members, for allowing us to appear in front of you tonight. I've already met your city manager, Greg Larson. He and I had a great conversation together and talked about what we could do mutually for each of our institutions. I'm in making these trips, I want to assure and reassure you that we will continue to be the valuable resource for the district that West Valley and Mission College have been for a number of years now. In a couple of years, we're facing our 50th anniversary. It's going to be a great celebration. We're spending a lot of money on our campuses right now, sprucing them up, replacing buildings. One of our campuses, Mission Campus, is going to be almost completely recreated by the spending of Measure C bond monies that we just acquired in the last bond election. We're very happy to do that. We're very happy to be one of the best values for young people and for out-of-work workers looking to retrain themselves in a field in the entire valley, Silicon Valley. I should also note, before I turn this podium over to my colleague Brad Davis, that I am a proud resident of Los Gatos. Right now I live up on Turney Road. In a few months I'm going to be switching locations, but staying in Los Gatos, switching to a nice little house on Ashler, right up from the DMV, where I spent 3.5 hours the other day getting my California license. But it's a wonderful town, and I really enjoy walking the streets on Saturday and Sunday, seeing the diversity of your population, seeing the real wealth of the town in terms of your inhabitants, in terms of what they bring. I'm looking forward to that art exhibit on the floor in the library. It's a great place to be. I came down from Pierce College in Puyallup, Washington. And the sunshine, the people, the valley, the opportunities here, all of it makes for a really invigorating, tremendous experience. I look to getting to know each one of you and to seeing what we can do as good neighbors and as a great resource for you, for this town and for all the inhabitants of the district. Thank you, and now I'll turn it over to Brad Davis.
Thank you all for having me. I very much appreciate it. Apropos of Jack's earlier reference to baseball, the Giants are winning 5-1 for anybody that's interested. You know, I've been with the district for more than 3 years now, and I've been in a variety of roles during that period of time. None more exciting than being the president of West Valley College at a time when we are experiencing unprecedented growth in terms of our beautiful facilities. If you haven't had the chance to visit West Valley College lately, please come down and see me. I'd like nothing more than to give every one of you a tour to show you, why we are really the hidden jewel of the Bay Area as it relates to college campuses. In the next 5 years, as we complete our build-out from our bond monies, we are going to have an absolutely state-of-the-art facility. For those of you in the audience that may be considering your next college choice, please keep us in mind, and I'd be happy to tour each and every one of you as well. Many of you probably had a chance to meet my predecessor, Lori Gaskin, and I'm sure that you were impressed with her dedication to partnerships, establishing partnerships with the community and working to build bridges. And I can assure you that I will continue that trend as long as I'm fortunate enough to be in the position of president at the college. Please call me if I can help you in any way get to know us or partner with you better. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming and introducing yourselves. It was great to see you, and we appreciate you coming and giving us a chance to get to know you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council.
Next verbal communications is Chris Miller.
Good evening. So 27.9% actually has a unique value to it, and that is how far we are in the decade so far, as of today, 27.9%. And so the town adopted the general plan 2 years ago, the 2010 to 2020 general plan, and I have a question and a suggestion. The question that I have, the Human Services Section 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 all deal with youth, and HS 4.1, I'm curious to know the status of that. Actually, something that I remember Councilwoman McNutt mentioning at the hearing on that was the coordination with community partners to conduct a needs assessment for youth facilities, activities, employment opportunities, and programs. So we'd love to know what the status of that is, seeing that we're 27.9% through the decade. And then the suggestion that I have, I've been doing some research on youth commissions, and I did send an email to the council late last week, but there is an opportunity for the town council to take a look at possibly adopting a policy that reads any new or revised policy that includes changes to service delivery programs or staffing that impact the quality of life of youth in the town of Los Gatos shall be referred to the Youth Commission for consideration. I've attended Youth Commission meetings actually since it started in 2004. I try to get to 2 or 3 a year, and I've noticed that while the Youth Commission has done some great stuff with the youth-friendly business program, I'm actually working and doing some stuff in Palo Alto, and they're looking to adopt the Los Gatos model, which is a wonderful testament to the work of the Youth Commission. I also have noticed that there has been a lack of things that the Youth Commission has looked at that have ultimately come to council. I know the skateboard park issue was one that did go through Youth Commission, but I've had the opportunity to look at the cities of Santa Clara, San Jose, San Carlos, Foster City, and as well as speaking with the Director of Education for the California Parks and Recreation Society, and looking at what are some ways that youth can get more involved in policy, which actually coincides with the some of the plans or some of the policy language in the 2022 statement, including continue to encourage the Youth Commission to explore youth concerns and opportunities, facilitate community forums, and undertake special projects, as well as create additional opportunities to involve the Youth Commission and other town commissions.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Since we can't take action on any of this tonight, I'll direct look to Mr. Larson to be able to answer the rest of that in due course, I assume?
Yes. Every year through the council's strategic goals retreat in January, you set updated priorities for the next 2 years. As we heard earlier this evening, our affordable housing element, which was on a tight deadline by January 2013, was the general plan priority. Certainly the youth serving and human service elements of the general plan can be presented to council in January as possible priorities for the next 2-year strategic goal. Fortunately, our Youth Commission already does have a strong resolution adopted by the council that gives the Youth Commission authority and direction to advise council on matters pertaining to issues involving the youth of Los Gatos, and we will look to the police department, the council, and the other commissions to help tee up and identify additional issues that can be forwarded to the Youth Commission on their way to the council, with the exception of land use matters, which the council has previously determined, given their adjudicatory and regulatory role, are the purview of the Planning Commission and the council. So we look forward to that discussion in January and to working with the Youth Commission and all youth-serving agencies, including the Los Gatos Recreation and Education Department, which is now directed by our own town staff, Regina Faulkner, who would have coordinated these issues to this date.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. All right, we'll move on to our regular agenda items, starting with item number 3 under other business, Parks and Public Works, job number 11-07, Downtown Tree Light Replacement Project. This will be, report will be by Director of Parks and Public Works, Todd Capurso.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This project proposes to relight the 156 street trees on North Santa Cruz and Main throughout the downtown. As a history, this project goes back to when the Christmas tree at the plaza was relit using LED lighting approximately 4 years ago, and that was a joint project between the town and the Los Gatos Community Foundation. Immediately following that project, we began a street tree retrofitting project to take the incandescent lighting off of the street trees and replace with LEDs in a similar fashion to what we did on the Christmas tree. That project was not as successful as the Christmas tree project and did not produce the desired outcome. Earlier this year, council directed staff to return with a plan to relight the downtown street trees in a manner that is more aesthetically pleasing. Staff evaluated a variety of installation options, and after discussion with both the Beautification Committee and the Los Gatos Community Foundation, we are recommending a change in the installation technique from lights in the upper portion of the tree to what would be called a wrapping of the trunks, which is consistent with the photographs that you have before you. After a field review of the existing installation, staff also recommends upgrading the electrical connection at each individual lighting location. Staff continues to coordinate with the Los Gatos Community Foundation on their fundraising efforts that may be used to offset the town's investment in this project as well. And if approved by council, staff will begin working with the contractor immediately in an effort to complete this project prior to the Christmas tree lighting ceremony on November 30th. So that concludes staff presentation on this issue, and I'm happy to answer any questions or provide additional information as council sees fit. Thank you.
Any questions of staff? Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. The trees will remain lit all year? That was a question. Will the trees, I'll put it in the form of a question.
Would you put that in the form of a, yeah. I'll take trees for 50.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, they will remain lit all year. The street trees will, not the Christmas tree.
Okay. So I just want to, and I think I already shared this experience with someone, but we thought it was a really cool idea to wrap the trunk of a tree in our backyard one year at Christmas, and then left it up because it looked so good, and then the tree trunk grew around the lights, and we had to cut them off, and there's now ridges on the tree trunk. So I'm assuming that someone more skilled in arborist things than me is aware of that and make adjustments so that we're not actually harming the trees.
That's a very good point, and that is something that staff would have to monitor over the years. This is not a once upon a time you put the lighting in the tree and you're done with it. This is a project that would have to be monitored not on a daily or weekly basis, but probably annually, an annual inspection, and I doubt that adjustments would have to be made even that frequently, but periodically some of the trunks would probably have to be rewrapped. It's not an uncommon occurrence with other cities as well, but you're absolutely right. This is something that we would have to monitor.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure you had that because we were quite surprised at how much the tree trunk grew very quickly.
Very quickly.
Councilmember Leonardis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With the previous partnership that we had with the Community Foundation, did they put forth 100% of the funding for this project previously?
On the Christmas tree project, it was very close to 100%. It was a combination where they purchased essentially 100% of the materials, and then the town supplied the labor to do the change out. On the street trees, it was very close. If I'm not mistaken, I think the town had to augment the amount of lighting that was purchased by the Community Foundation, but it was it approached 100%, I believe, on the materials. But we did supply the labor to do the actual retrofitting.
And we also received back in 2008 a one-time grant from PG&E that went through the Community Foundation that provided the final funding needed other than the labor provided by town staff. And working with the Community Foundation, they are raising funds for this project as well. They are hopeful, and maybe Sharon can speak to that, of support from PG&E, more likely in the way of materials instead of grant this year. But it is a continuing partnership, so what we've presented in the staff report is the maximum amount of funds that would be spent by the town, but it's also the amount needed to enter into the contract to have the work done by the Christmas tree lighting instead of waiting for all the sources of funding to come together.
Okay, other questions of staff? I have no cards, but I'll open the public hearing if anybody wishes to speak on this agenda item. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. I'll look to council for further discussion or motion. Councilmember Przinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, first of all, this is going to make a lot of people in this community very happy, because this has been something, I think, one of the most frequent requests for enhancements to our downtown that I've heard in the last couple of years. And it's always been the same. We have such a beautiful downtown, but we don't have the kind of lighting that is appropriate to the character of our downtown community. So I'm going to ask a question of the attorney. We have 3 actions that are noted here. Can we do this as a single motion for all 3 actions, Madam Attorney?
Yes.
Then I'm going to move to authorize the manager to execute a construction contract with Siemens Industries for an amount not to exceed $97,500, to authorize staff to execute future change orders in the construction contract necessary for an amount up to $10,000, and authorize the general fund transfer to General Fund Appropriations Reserve, or GFAR, to fund the budget adjustments for expenditures in the amount of $107,500, and it's including that contingency. That's my motion.
Councilmember McNutt.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Vice Mayor Spector.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. There might be some out there thinking, well, are spending $100,000 for holiday lights when you can spend it for something else. But we need to realize that the economic vitality of our downtown is extremely important to us. As part of the North 40 specific plan study, we did an economic analysis that showed that in 1 year we had $320 million worth of people coming into Los Gatos to use our services and buy our products. And the other item of interest is Main Street. The lights are going to go on Santa Cruz and Main Street. There's been a challenge on Main Street. They didn't have we may think that the lighting on Santa Cruz Avenue is not as great as we want it to be, but the people on Main Street, the businesses on Main Street did not have lighting. They put their own lighting up, and then recently they lost connection somehow to PG&E, so they lost lighting altogether. The bottom line is that with the economic vitality that this kind of thing brings to our town, with the cooperation of the Community Foundation, thank you, representative out there in our audience, I will be supporting this motion.
Councilmember Leonardis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was initially concerned about taking the money from the general fund prior to raising the money from the community for this, because this is a cosmetic item, and I realize that it will enhance our town. However, and with respect to what Council or Vice Mayor Spector said, I agree. I think it will bring in more people. I think, as Councilmember Przinski said, it's going to make a lot of people very happy. So, reluctantly taking the money from the general fund prematurely before the money is raised, I have faith in the Community Foundation that they will help us, and I will support the motion as well.
Yeah, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I'll support the motion as well for much of what has already been said. But whether other funding sources come through or not, the bottom line is this is one of those intangibles that makes our town, and I think it will be an enhancement, and I think it's, quite frankly, more than an expenditure. It's an investment that will pay dividends, so I'll also support the motion. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We'll move on to agenda item. Thank you, Mr. Capurso and staff, for bringing this back so quickly and making sure that we'll get it done on time. Moving on to agenda item number 4. First of all, Council, I'll point out that we do have a desk item on this. Hopefully everybody got that earlier today and has it here. The sustainability plan. Staff report will be Associate Planner Jennifer Savage.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. The sustainability plan that you have before you has gone through a lengthy process of approximately 10 months. We have had 2 town council study sessions, 2 community open houses and or workshops, a public comment period, and a couple planning commission hearings. The sustainability plan that you have before you includes several chapters, including an inventory, a target, reduction measures, and implementation plan. The Planning Commission recommended approval of the plan and adoption and approval of the EIR addendum. with minor modifications to the implementation schedule for a few measures. The council should consider whether to include those measures in the sustainability plan should you approve it tonight. This concludes staff presentation.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? Seeing none. Maybe? I'll wait. Or I could open the public hearing and... Question, Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. On TR6, and I know we've seen this many times, in an answer to a comment I saw on the desk item from planning commissioners, yes, we do actually read every one of these documents a couple of times for these study sessions. But I just noticed this wording kind of popped out at me on this reading of it. So TR6, implement a voluntary employer commute trip reduction program for new and existing development. It's the implement that's bothering me, if that's the correct word, because I'm not sure that the municipality, we as a town, can implement a program for existing developments. So am I not reading that correctly? Is the wording off, or are we setting ourselves up here for something that we can't actually accomplish?
This particular component of TR6, letter A, was revised slightly through some of the study sessions. The last sentence regarding encouraging employers to allow commuters to pay for transit with pre-tax dollars that was originally require. Implement a voluntary employer commuter trip, which was part of your specific question, is certainly something that would be voluntary, so a new development could determine that the specific examples given in that measure may not be appropriate to their development, that perhaps only a bicycle rack or bicycle lockers are appropriate in that regard. But you certainly do have the option of changing that wording as well.
Yeah, maybe as we go through discussion, staff could think about another word, because implement assumes that we have the power and ability to do that, and I do not think that we do. I had a couple other...
Okay.
I think. On TR8, sorry, you just go past that. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, TR8. This is the one about reducing vehicle circulation associated with parking, especially in the downtown district. And right now, it's indicated as 2015 to 2020. This isn't a question, this is a comment, but I think that's one that we should try to do sooner, because I know we've been talking about better signage in downtown as a way, I know Parking Commission's been talking about it as a way to alleviate some of the parking problems, because people, and also the nasty notes when they get tickets, because they don't know where they can park, and they get misled. So as we go through the changes, I would recommend that we move that one back to 2012 to 2015. No comment?
Before changing pages, we do have a couple suggestions for TR6A, since we are hoping for action by council this evening. Could either be support a voluntary employer commute trip reduction program, or develop a program for a voluntary employer. Both of those would reduce the town ownership as a staff workload item for operating and maintaining what developments might use as a voluntary employer commute trip reduction. I would propose those as alternatives for Councilwoman McNutt or council consideration.
So I'm sorry, what was the first word again?
First would just be to change implement to support.
Okay.
The second one was to develop a program for a voluntary.
Like support.
And that's fine.
Support.
Either support.
Yeah.
And then I had my third and last question is on GB5, and this is one that the Planning Commission is recommending that it get moved up to a sooner time frame. And my question is whether or not that's realistic. So this is identifying and removing regulatory or procedural barriers to implementing green building practices by updating codes, guidelines, and zoning. So basically, it's 2013 now. Is that something that can actually be done in 2 years, or was it originally put at 2015 to 2020 because it's not realistic to get done in the next 2 years?
Portions of that would certainly be realistic in that the building code has been updated to adopt more of the green building standards that the state has adopted for the building code. In terms of the likelihood of doing the guidelines and zoning changes, that's something that would need further study to see whether or not, first, if there are any implementation or if there are any barriers, and if so, what those barriers are and what needs to be done to change those. It's something that you could conceivably put to the wider implementation schedule where it's 2012 to 2020, so that those that can be implemented sooner would be, and those that need further study and cannot be implemented in the 2012-2015 period could be incorporated into the next implementation schedule.
I'm done.
Okay. Councilmember Brzezinski, did you have something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was wondering, in those two action words that you used in TR6, Mr. Manager, we have used the word encourage in an awful lot of these recommendations that we see are either out of our control or are not going to be required on our part. And I would use that as a possible alternate word rather than what you had recommended, only because, like in the second one, I think it actually asks us to develop a program, correct, which then puts a burden on staff. Not that this isn't a good thing, but it seems to be more in the realm of the employer than our own.
All these verbs have differing levels of impact on what the actual reduction is. In reality, for all of these, there will be follow-on work, and encourage would have a lower level of emissions reduction associated with it than would support, than would implement. So we're stepping down the scale, but in reality, it's all for a voluntary program, and so we will be encouraging people to participate in that. And whether it's encouraging, supporting, or implementing a voluntary program, I think the end result is the same, and I think we'd be more aggressive on encouraging factors and less aggressive on implementing factors, and we'll try to maintain the same emissions reduction calculation that was assumed for the study. And I think encourage we could probably make work. I defer to Ms. Savage.
It could.
I guess my sense is that for us as a government agency, if we can get voluntary compliance, it is to our benefit. And the question really then comes down to voluntary compliance that achieves the same outcome, ultimately, should be one of the issues that we attempt to validate here. If I might, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to go through the other recommendations the Planning Commission made for changes in timing. The next one, I believe, is RE4, which is the leaf blower issue. And the Planning Commission, as I read their minutes, indicated that they would like to move that to the 2012-2015 timeframe over the 2015-2020. First of all, what's the sense of council as regards that move? Because we know that it has surfaced as something that has got some interest in the community right now. It's even gotten editorials in the local paper. But the other issue is, I think, similar to what Councilwoman McNutt asked, and that is doable by staff within a time frame that is moved up. So maybe the staff's response first could be on the issue of the time frame and capacity.
That issue on capacity was discussed a little bit at the Planning Commission meeting, in that the matter may come before us for a different issue besides emissions, and that may be of noise. So it's possible that the the issue of adopting that ordinance will come before us within the time frame proposed, the earlier time frame, and it could be implemented for a different reason, but still benefit this measure.
All right, so the time frame works out for staff.
Correct.
Okay? And I'm going to hold that question of council for a little later. The next would be on the water and wastewater, WW1. There was a significant interest in the Planning Commission to move green building requirements and the water requirements to a higher priority. That's my general impression. But in terms of this one, there was a request that both WW1, WW2 be moved to the earlier time frame. Could staff address, again, the capacity issue on both of those, since those were Planning Commission recommendations?
Those which relate to the green building standards in terms of the state requirements, those are more easily implemented than others. The others will remain unknown until we can do a feasibility study and get priorities from the council in terms of other workloads outside of the sustainability plan.
Okay, so it's partial, is what you're indicating, that we can partially accomplish these within this time frame, but we'd want to bifurcate those parts that would take a longer period of time?
Correct.
Okay. Is the staff prepared to do that separation of tasks at this point with those two items, WW1 and 2?
No, we are not.
Okay. Thank you. All right, and I believe, unless the manager wants to speak to that?
For those, if we don't want to do this on all of them because then we lose all prioritization, but given the bifurcation that was just presented by staff and questioned by the council, that might be another one, at least WW1, to go to a 2012 to 2020 timeline, recognizing there's some earlier work, which is the green building standards as discussed, and some later work.
Okay. Thank you. Can I continue, Mr. Mayor?
Please.
If we go to WW5, this is the free water audit, working with the San Jose Water Company and Valley Water District. Again, that was a request to move up within this concept, the concept that water was a higher priority and needed to be evaluated earlier. In WW5, with this free water audits issue, the capacity of staff with the 2012-2015 as proposed?
That would be feasible.
Okay. What about WW6? That's the zoning code to support residential rainwater systems?
The feasibility of the earlier implementation schedule is unknown at this point.
Unknown, okay. We're taking good notes, right, about what is known and unknown? Okay. And I think there are only two more. SW8, plastic bags. It's an issue that's out there. I think what we've talked about is working with City of San Jose to do their EIR evaluation before we take a step.
I think it's San Mateo County.
Okay. And the City of San Jose was going to be operating, yes. We were going to look to other agencies and let them take the heat before we jump in. And I'm curious, with that in mind, is this advanced time frame appropriate, significant, inappropriate? What's your feeling?
First, staff wasn't letting other communities take the heat, but do the legwork for us that we could ride in their, I'm forgetting the metaphor.
That's how I define it.
Draft behind them. The issue is 2015 to 2020. I believe many city staff across multiple jurisdictions believe there'll be state action on this issue by then. That creates a uniform system. If we move the schedule up to 2012, 2015, we may need a unilateral action by the town. Staff can accommodate whatever the council's direction is.
All right, we can, I'm sure, discuss whether or not we want to move more quickly into that realm. But I do recall we'd indicated that our interest was to be unified with the rest of the bodies when we approach this. The last is CA2, the Information Center. Seemed like a reasonable expectation to move up to 1215?
Yes.
All right. Those are all my questions for now, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Anybody else? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and go to the public hearing. Anybody wish to step forward and speak about the Town of Los Gatos Sustainability Plan? I have no cards. I will close the public hearing and go back to council. Do you want to go?
Can I just make one comment? You realize you six are now representing the entire community at this point.
What high school? What high school? Prospect. Okay. Staff's pleasure. Do you want to run through those one at a time and get a sense of the council?
Maybe we could do it page by page and take get an action on changes council wants and then have a final summative action on those.
Yep.
That might be the easiest approach. I did not note any changes on page 1 of Exhibit 5, TR 1 through 4. So silence means assent. In that case, on page 2, the language that's been proposed would be to change TR 6A to encourage, to change the timeline for TR 8 to 2012 to 2015, and to change the timeline for GB 5 to 2012 to 2020. Those are the 3 recorded comments.
Okay. Any dissent on that? Okay.
For page 3, it's RE4 is open for council discussion. We could move it up to a 2012 to 15 if that's the council's preference.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question of staff, if I might. This issue is certainly gaining legs in the letters to the editor, editorials, and so forth. But it says here, adopt an ordinance to ban the use of two-stroke engine leaf blowers. Putting aside whether this council will go that way or not, and focusing on the time frame involved instead, it seems to me that moving forward on the issue before 2015, but not committing to what will happen in that time frame, might be a reasonable way to go. And what is staff's thoughts in that regard?
That is certainly feasible, as with all of the measures. If we choose to take a look at them earlier than the implementation time frame, that certainly leaves the opportunity to do legwork prior to that time frame and actually take action during the specified implementation schedule and the measures.
I'm a little concerned more with the second half of that than I am the first half. The leaf blowers is one part, but as part of the ordinance, establish planting and maintenance guidelines to reduce maintenance needs. That's not just talking about leaf blowers. We're talking about, that's a real fundamental change in ordinances. So I'm not sure, my concern would be if we're going to move this up, we might have to separate out the 2 issues. So, Councilmember Pruszynski.
Yes, I think this is much more complicated than it looks at first glance. I've read some studies recently where the manufacturer of these leaf blowers indicate that two-stroke, there's a new product that's being developed that is actually more environmentally appropriate, and that to ban two-stroke without looking at the latest in innovations might be acting without full understanding about what's out there. I think also there are some issues relative to our maintaining our environment. And there are a lot of individuals who come into our community, and I am also one of the individuals who is upset when you have that loud two-stroke gas-powered leaf blower right next door. But I want us to make sure we have full information, and I don't think we have sufficient information given just the language. I think the Vice Mayor's comment was appropriate, that if we want to do this, we need to look carefully at the restrictions we put ourselves under. If we say we're going to adopt an ordinance rather than study the possibility of adopting an ordinance within this time frame, then I think we may be putting ourselves at some risk. The other part that the mayor points out, I think, is accurate, because that maintenance guideline goes a little bit beyond the reach of what that leaf blower issue is all about, which I think is the community's question right now, because it is definitely on front burner for an awful lot of people.
Mr. Manager?
Yes. To see where the council consensus might be, let me propose some changes to that language, which would be for RE4, consider adopting an ordinance on the restriction or banning of the use of two-stroke engine leaf blowers, period, simultaneously, comma, establish planting and maintenance guidelines to reduce maintenance needs. So it removes those guidelines from an ordinance, which is a little bit oxymoronic. And the council could still make them part of the ordinance or leave them just as education and policy guidance. So I'm listening to what's being said and thinking that language may deal with it.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
I guess I don't know where this came from. And it seems to me, I'm curious what the guidelines for maintenance of my yard would look like, okay? I think I do a pretty good job without any guidelines right now. So the issue of having to establish guidelines simultaneous to this leaf blower ban, I don't see them necessarily. There's a real nexus there.
Yeah, let me ask a question. If we just, I don't disagree with your language on the first part, right? Just remove the whole second part. I'm not sure if there's any meat to that bone as it is from the perspective of renewable energy and low carbon fuels. Do we need to establish guidelines? I know we've been through this several times and somehow this got missed, but does it need to be there at all?
The maintenance without the two-stroke engine leaf blowers is not part of the greenhouse gas emission consideration, so you certainly could strike the second part.
So I would suggest we strike the whole issue of establishing planting and maintenance guidelines. And if the manager could reread what you put, consider
adopting an ordinance to restrict or ban the use of two-stroke engine leaf blowers.
Okay. Personally, I'd be okay with that and even moving that up to the 2012 to 2015. Okay, I think we have consensus there.
Okay. And those were all the changes I noted on page 3. On page 4, EC 2 through 10, there were no discussion items. Then on page 5, WW1, staff suggestion following council discussion was to change that timeline, and planning commission recommendation would be to change that timeline to 2012 as the early point, but extended to 2020 for the more challenging aspects. And then we did not provide direction on WW2, whether to move that up to 2012 to 15 or leave it at 2015 to 20. That's subject to council.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Planning Commission moved that one to 2012, 2015. Does staff have any input or concerns or issues with moving that one up?
Only that staff capacity to do those two parts is not known at this time.
So then my question for staff would be, when it's not known, given the input of the Planning Commission, given their unanimous input to us, and given the fact that it's not known, would a reasonable compromise be to do 2012 to 2020, or do you have some other idea?
The 2012 to 2020.
And when staff workload capacity is not known, that's also something council can determine.
And I'm fine with that as well. Is that consensus? We have consensus there.
Then page 6 is 2012, 2015 was the Planning Commission, and staff felt that could be accommodated because it's largely working with outside parties, not town work directly. The next one, WW6, is more challenging because it's a zoning code update, and we have lots of policy and zoning code issues before us already. And so that was an unknown for WW6. So right now it stands coming to you recommended as 2015-20 in the document and 2012-15 from the Planning Commission.
Councilmember Brzezinski?
Do we have zoning code right now about rainwater collection?
No.
So the intent is that there may be some people out there who are collecting the rainwater and it's not permitted, or we haven't really captured it in our zoning. So they're doing it kind of in a renegade fashion without our oversight. Is that correct?
The measure is intended to support and promote the rainwater collection, not that it's necessarily illegal at this point or unpermitted. Sorry.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess the real question is, do we need zoning code for this? Or is this actually language that we could indicate we wanted to promote, encourage and promote rainwater collection?
I think it has to do with the storage, as I recall. I'm going back in my memory that there's a storage issue because to collect it, you need tanks and that kind of stuff. And that might be what the issue is.
I was just going to suggest we could do, as we have done in a few others previously, WW6A, encourage residential rainwater collection, and B, consider zoning or other code amendments to encourage and support rainwater.
That'd be okay.
And then the first one could be 2012-15, and the second one could be 15-20.
Perfect. Is that okay? We're good?
Okay.
Moving right through this.
SW9, SW8, plastic bags. Staff reported to council that 2015-2020 would likely be following the actions of other jurisdictions and probably the state. 2012-2015 is recommended by the Planning Commission, would likely require independent town action, relying on the environmental review that we've already partnered with San Mateo County to conduct.
Yeah, I'll jump in, and I'd prefer to leave this as it is. I don't want to see us expend time, effort, and get in front of something that I think is, at least talking about it from the Solid Waste Management Joint Powers Authority, I think there's something anyway, and why we would want to get ahead of it and spend time and effort on it ahead of time, I'm not sure I would support. So I'd prefer to leave it as it is. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I heard what you said, but it didn't stick. What is your understanding now of when this concept of an ordinance might be coming before the town of Los Gatos, given what's going on in other jurisdictions?
Right now, it is not a scheduled work plan item for the town. The prior discussion with council was as a wait and see on this issue. With this action tonight, if the council were to move the timeline up to 2012-2015, we would bring forward to you an ordinance to ban the use of plastic bags prior to 2015, regardless of state or other local jurisdictions having taken similar actions.
Vice Mayor.
Yeah, I didn't phrase my question well enough, obviously. What is your understanding of when this issue would come back before the town if we waited for other entities, regions, counties to bring it forward?
I would never guarantee an action by the state, but I think we've all heard discussion that there has been state legislation for statewide action on this that's been considered and postponed. My guess would be prior to us considering a standalone ordinance for Los Gatos, it would be likely that the state might have an ordinance or legislation that they've considered with an implementation date that's in 2015, 2016, or even earlier. So if we leave it as it's on the page, I think the state will preempt local action, while if we move it up, we may need to act in advance of the state.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Brzezinski.
I believe the train is down the track on this one. And I actually think SW8 doesn't completely capture what now is the environment for plastic bags. It also includes styrofoam and various other environmentally hazardous materials that are being looked at. I have a feeling that we should be in front of this, not necessarily draw it to close, but I think we need to be working at what the community really wants, what we want as a community, because banning of plastic bags, restriction of styrofoam, all those kinds of things, they're being developed within our environment. Every day we hear something new in the media about one of our neighborhood communities that are banning one or the other of these materials. And so I kind of have a feeling that it's necessary for us to actually be more progressive on this one and start to create what ordinance language would be appropriate to us. Maybe the language isn't to adopt by this time, but to prepare an ordinance that would allow us then to integrate that with the timing of the state. And so maybe something in this SW8 should recommend that we prepare an ordinance appropriate to our community that will be coincident with what the larger community of the county and the state is evolving, so that we're ahead of the game, because there's something in me that just hates to wait for the state to do anything or then to necessarily follow the state. But I think if we start to work on this in a more aggressive way, we can do the outreach to the community, outreach to the retail and restaurant community, which will all be affected by this. And I would like to see us be more expansive, but not necessarily restricted to the adoption of an ordinance.
Vice Mayor.
I would agree. I think we need to, if we go that path, we need to not use the word adopt an ordinance, soften that concept, expand the plastic bags portion of it, and look to the other communities that Mr. Brzezinski mentioned, because there are several within our county and within the Bay Area that have done this work. So, again, I don't know what the words are, but clean up the language, soften the language in the verb, expand the language in the nouns, and bring something back to us 2015 to 2020. I mean 2012 to 2015.
I have some proposed language if there's a third member of council that would like to hear it.
Go ahead. Councilmember McNutt.
I actually disagree on this one. I'm more in line with the mayor. I think when you have state law coming that's going to usurp anything that's done locally anyhow, and this is it's one of those issues that there's more sides to it than is often promoted in a cheerleading environmental fashion. I can't tell you how many times I'm in the store and people say, thank God they still have bags in Los Gatos, because I never remember in San Jose to bring mine. I think we should just leave it where it is for a lot of different reasons. So now we're at 2-2.
Councilmember Leonardis, would you like to weigh in on this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I didn't think it was going to be this difficult on this one bullet, because all my other council members have done such an exemplary job this evening going through this, so I didn't have much more to say. I guess the question is, this would present an opportunity for Los Gatos to save the world of plastic bags, potentially 3 years earlier than if California comes along in 2015 or 2016. But as I think of our citizens and my behavior and what our stores are doing now, they're highly promoting the use of reusable bags independently, and I think most people are very aware of how they like to bag their items when they leave the store, and I'm curious how much, if we do adopt an earlier ordinance, or if we do start to move in that direction of drafting an earlier ordinance, how much would we really be saving? I think of CVS, Walgreens. I'm very hard pressed to see stores that use a lot of plastic bags. I think most of the time it's paper or reusable bags. So I would be hesitant to complicate things by trying to adopt an ordinance prior to what the state is trying to implement on this. I feel that we have a lot of other things that might go further as far as sustainability is concerned that we can be working on.
So staff can verify for our notes and record keeping, it would either be leave the language as is, or I could present the alternative language subject to council preference.
I think as is. Okay.
And CA2 on the last page, staff indicated could be achieved in the Planning Commission recommended time frame.
I'm fine with that.
So for all the changes noted by staff, with the exception of SW8, it appeared to be consensus of the council for when you get to voting on the package.
Okay, any further discussion or a motion? Councilmember Leonardis.
I'll move to approve the sustainability plan with the changes we discussed this evening. And I don't want to go through the individual changes unless that's necessary. Okay, we have that on record.
So are you moving the recommended action of both 1 and 2? I assume we can do that as a single motion? Okay.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Spector?
I'll wait till somebody seconds it, then I have a question.
Okay. Councilmember McNutt?
I will second it.
Okay. Vice Mayor Spector?
Thank you. First of all, I'll be supporting the motion, even though I do not agree with the way the plastic bag is going forward. But the question I have of staff is on page 4 of the staff report. It references the commission recommending that the green building measures and the water and wastewater measures be numbers 1 and 2 in priority. It also recommended a staff person who would begin moving forward on these issues. Do you see that as encompassed within the decisions we've made so far? Do we need to do more to encompass those? Do you have problems with them?
In terms of putting priorities 1 and 2 forward, that's certainly encompassed in the implementation period, and the order of each of those measures would be determined as we move forward in the implementation plan for the sustainability plan. In terms of the second question for establishing somebody to be part of that, that's certainly a measure in the sustainability plan. We do have a member who you heard earlier this evening, Monica Wren, who is serving much like an environmental believe her title is Environmental Services Coordinator, and she has a lot of great information on the sustainability efforts that the town has put forward thus far. And we imagine that some of the measures that are in there, especially the ones that note existing programs that the town has implemented already, can be found on the website that she maintains or added to it.
Thank you. That answers my question, but before we sign off here soon, I just wanted to commend staff, the consultant, the Planning Commission. I mean, this is sort of like the overlay zone work. It's a lot of work over a long period of time with a lot of detail. Very commendable.
Yeah, and I'll second that, but I will also say, even though I'm going to support the motion, I have a great deal of concern that we are laying out a pretty ambitious work plan for the next 8 years. Much of it, not all of it, but much of it, like the overlay zones, kind of forced upon us by the state. And there's supposed to be a law about unfunded mandates, but they sure seem to find a way around it. And while, as I said, there's great stuff in here and there's great action items that we're going to be able to do to help promote and sustainability and save resources and all that, I'm just really concerned about the ultimate costs of some of these requirements that we have been subjected to. So, other comments or questions? Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To second what the mayor's comments are, we all want the environment to be enhanced, so that's not an issue. But I think we have to be very cautious, given our economic realities, of the dedication of specific staff to the monitoring of this program. I think we have to be on top of our game when it comes to how it is we execute this, but we have so many other things that are significant in the community, and this one does not trump all. And when we get to our retreat, this will be an opportunity for us to again revisit our prioritization of those things that we consider immediate, and in some ways, see how these particular issues fit into the rest of our menu of needs as a community. So we try to accomplish all. I think that's the key. We try to accomplish all, but we need to make sure that where we devote staff time and resources very much is in line with accomplishing all in the prioritization that we are engaged in. There were a couple other things the Planning Commission mentioned I'd like staff comment on before we approve this motion, because I'm going to support it as well. On page 4, they talked about a staff report out about our accomplishments on a regular basis, annual basis. I'm assuming that is able to be accomplished and is encouraged by staff.
An annual report out is certainly possible. I paused when I saw equivalent to the capital improvement program, because that is a multi-staff, hundreds of millions of dollars, well, tens of millions of dollars for the town of Los Gatos every 5-year project. So I thought that analogy could be challenging to achieve without significant budget changes by the council during the next budget cycle. And I did want to reiterate, we do have an environmental services coordinator, half-time position, has other duties as well. And what we've talked about through your action in the Planning Commission's direction is prioritizing that existing work. There has been no budget action or addition of staff through this action tonight to add additional work. It's prioritization of existing work. That addition of additional staff or resources would be a budget decision of the council following your strategic goals session.
Okay. I saw the reference to capital improvement plan as analogous rather than an exact match, yes. And I appreciate both those comments, and that concludes my comments.
Vice Mayor.
Actually, they answered my questions. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. That concludes our agenda for this evening. We are adjourned.